Hello, this is your State Senator Len Suzio speaking to you from the Capitol. I'm up here in the upper reaches of the Capitol itself, where we have a special studio set up for shows like the one we're going to do today. Today is a part of a continuing series of shows that we have where I interview people of interest, people who either are doing great things for the state of Connecticut, people sometimes who are active in my own Senate district, and people who are involved in issues that I think are important to my constituents and to the state. And today I'm going to be interviewing a woman from the Department of Children and Families, DCF. She works with respect to young women and sex trafficking issues in particular. And I want to introduce you today, Tammy Sneed. Tammy, welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today. Let's first of all talk about you for a minute so the audience can get familiar. Who is Tammy Sneed? What do you do? For whom do you work?
Great. I work for the Department of Children and Families. Mm-hmm. I've been with the department for about 14 years at this point, and my focus is on gender-responsive services for our adolescents in the system. In regards to what falls under that is I also oversee Connecticut's Human Anti-Trafficking Response Team. We call that HART, H-A-R-T, mm-hmm. and we're very focused on understanding what trafficking looks like in the state of Connecticut, how we can combat it, how can we serve the kids that are victims of trafficking, and ultimately, how can we stop it in the state of Connecticut.
Okay, let's begin in a more general approach, and then we'll work into the sex trafficking issue. Sure. So when you talk about gender-specific services, mm-hmm. explain to us, you know what you mean, but a lot of people may not. Sure. What does she mean by gender-specific services? So
sure.
Explain that.
When you work with kids, whether they're boys or girls, they have individual needs, both as a young person that's sitting in front of you, but also related to them as either a girl or a boy. Mm-hmm. And we have found that over years, programs, services have been designed for the male population, ultimately for adult males. That's how the system in general was created. And we learned over the years that it really wasn't meeting the needs of our girls. So we did some very focused efforts over the last probably 25 years on how do we create a system that is friendly to females, and it really takes into consideration the needs that these girls have. What's been interesting is there's been so much focus on that, and we've made some really good inroads. We started saying, what about the boys? So the system was created for adults. Mm-hmm. It wasn't created for our young men and for our boys in the system. So now we're looking at that population as well, and how do the services that we have in the state of Connecticut really meet those needs?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you, if you could give an example of how one approach for a female versus a male, let's say in terms of specific needs.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So it was interesting. For a number of years, we were seeing a lot of girls arrested. So law enforcement would show up at one of our programs. The girls would mouth off. They would do something kind of crazy. Police would arrest them, and we were seeing a number of kids go deeper and deeper into our juvenile justice system. What we learned in that process was that our approach with the girls was not where it should have been. So we created a document called Program Guidelines for Girl Services in Connecticut, which really outlines when you have a service for girls, these are the key areas you need to pay attention to. And a lot of it's how do we interact with girls. We did a training project with the Waterbury Police Department quite a few years ago and trained them on understanding girls. So when they go into a program, when they go into the mall, wherever they're coming into contact with girls, really looking at their approach in addressing the female population. We went from 30-something arrests in about 3 months to 1 arrest in a whole year. So it was really about understanding how you create relationships with the girls, how do you appreciate, we talk about girls being dramatic instead of talking about girls being resilient. So it's really about changing that mindset. Now when we're looking at boys, we were already assuming they were adults. So we really had to dive into where are boys in regards to adolescent development. What do they need specifically? They too need relationships, all right, whether you're a girl or a boy, but it often looks different. You can get boys into a group setting with a group of boys, and you can have some good successes playing basketball, engaged with the kids. With girls, it has to look very, very different. So really understanding those two differences when we're approaching them both in treatment, but as well as just in activities in the community, how law enforcement's working with them. We were seeing a lot of the PAL programs, which are wonderful, be predominantly male in those programs. Over the years, we're seeing now a lot of females in that program. Females want to be police officers. So it's really just kind of tailoring it based on a person's gender, but also understanding the trauma that a lot of our kids have gone through.
Yeah, I mean, you're working with kids who come from sometimes families that are dysfunctional families, basically, right? So they don't have good adult models in their lives, either male or female.
Correct. Or they often don't have the skills. And it's giving the parents skills. We do we do a training called Understanding Girls, a trauma-informed approach, and we have done that with our foster families. They love it, and it's 2 full days, so it's not an hour, 2-hour training. It's 2 full days, but really understanding how, from birth, the different stages of attachment, adolescent development, sexuality, relationships, all impact where kids end up and how we kind of perceive our kids.
And what kind of, if there are 2 or 3 predominant kinds of problems with the juvenile, let's say, what would be the 2 or 3 predominant issues or problems for females versus males? Could you articulate the differences there?
Probably the biggest one that we have found is that girls, typically when you see girls that are very aggressive or assaultive, their aggression is typically towards somebody they know. So it's in context of a relationship. And it's usually because we've missed something. We missed something that they needed in that relationship. Maybe they have had prior histories of abuse and neglect, and they're bringing those issues into their current relationship. So it typically is that relationship base to them. Boys, we all know, they get into a fight, it's over pretty quickly. They can resolve it and they don't carry it with them. With our girls, they tend to carry it for a while. And that's not a bad thing. But the way we look at it is a bad thing. So a lot of it's how do we look at girls as a society. One of our activities we do, which is a lot of fun, is we have folks list all the words that they think about when you talk about adolescent girls. And predominantly they're negative words.
Really?
So, absolutely. Dramatic, abusive, drama, PMSing. We hear the whole gamut, but all negative connotations. And then what we do is we say, all right, dramatic. Talk about that word dramatic. They're very resilient. They're expressive. Those are positive words.
Right.
So it's about how do you take what we typically use in a bad way and then change it. When you Google working with adolescent girls, you will come up with lots of information that's pretty negative. So it's really about changing that narrative.
That's interesting. I didn't think. I raised 4 daughters, and we had 1 son, and I can tell you there is a difference.
Oh, there is.
That's a big one.
There is. Yeah. And you can see it when you're raising. I've raised 5 kids, and now I have 3 granddaughters. They resolve their differences very, very differently. The boys can get into a fight, and 2 hours later, they're out playing ball and playing video games and, patting each other in the back. Girls, you have to really work with them because they have to understand what they've experienced and how to move forward with it.
Now, is there a growing issue with transgender kids? Tell us a little bit about that.
There is. True Colors has done amazing work, and they really have informed a lot of our work that we have done in developing our system, as well as the trafficking piece. It is. The challenge, though, and I just spoke at the homeless conference this morning there was like 500 people there, all very committed to working with homeless, both kids and adults in the state of Connecticut. But the challenge is with that population is they don't typically come to our attention. Sometimes they're rejected from their home. Many times they're rejected from their community. So they're not coming in front of us. Parents are not calling that in, so police are not aware they're missing. DCF's not aware they're missing. The neighbors are often not aware they're missing. And if we don't have them in front of us to try to provide supports, services, treatments, they're really going under the radar, and that's what really scares me. We've had, in regards to trafficking, and I know we're going to get there, we've only had about 2 transgender kids identified in the last couple of years. That really concerns me because we know with national statistics that number should be much higher.
Now, with respect to the population served by DCF of juveniles, I'm talking about, roughly how many girls versus boys are you dealing with roughly at any given time?
I don't have that data on me. For the last 25 years, except for the last couple, I've been very focused on girls. So when I'm looking at cases, when I'm looking at incident reports and crisis and different programs, it's very focused on girls. I can't give you that breakdown, but I know we have that, so I'd be happy to get back to you with it.
Now, is it like in the thousands, though, we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a
We
lot.
work with thousands of kids on an annual basis, so definitely.
Well, you and I met earlier this year, probably, I'm going to guess 4 months ago or so, and that's when I became aware of this sex trafficking issue for juveniles. And you were focused on that issue. You explained to me what was going on, and immediately, I was shocked by what you told me. And then we met in front of a group of people at the Mercy High School in Middletown. There was a packed cafeteria there. We had the FBI there. There's an FBI representative there who focuses on sex trafficking. And so let's talk about that issue a little bit.
Sure.
So why don't you describe to the audience exactly what the problem is and how prevalent it is in Connecticut?
Sure. It's a huge problem across the country. In U.S., the numbers are astounding. On a national basis, some of the low numbers are about 100,000 kids per year. Some of the higher data statistics are about 500,000. Part of the challenge is our kids often, again, are flying under the radar. They don't see themselves as victims. They're told what they're doing is wrong, but not the buyer or the trafficker. So data is really, really tough. In Connecticut, we started to keep data in 2008, and we have seen a steady incline over the last 10 years. So, I can go back to a couple of years. When 2016, we had 202 referrals to the department, and that's unique referrals. So if I was the victim, 5 people could have called me in. I'm only counted once in that data. Last year, we went up to 212. I think in 15, we're at about 133. So you can see 133, 202, 212. It's going up. We have done a lot of training. So in the last 2 years, we trained about 5,000 individuals. So when we do the trainings, we definitely see the referrals go up. So I do believe a lot of it is because before all the training efforts, we really didn't know what we were looking at. I could talk to professionals at this point, and they understand what it is. But I can go out to dinner with my husband or go to a friend's house, and they have no clue that this even exists in Connecticut. So I think we're just, getting into this. I think the numbers are probably much higher. Some people ask how we got into this. Probably 10 years ago, we got a call. One of our director of immigration practices for the department, he got a call from Homeland Security saying they were going to do a raid and they were expecting to recover some kids. Never happened. They recovered some adults. No kids were recovered. But it got us thinking, what are we going to do if this happens? What needs to be our response? At the same time, our adolescence division was looking at girls that were running away and what was happening to them. We were getting lots of reports of sexual abuse, being raped, but really trying to dive under that. How were they meeting folks in the community? What were their experiences? And we learned pretty quickly that yes, they were being raped. Yes, they were being sexually abused. When we really looked at the terminology, they were victims of trafficking. So that's when we really started to look at this, and we started to do some training internally. Initially it was just DCF. At this point, it's statewide. We are working with all law enforcement, medical providers, faith-based communities to really look at this issue, and now the numbers are going up. So I think, we will start to see probably some spikes over the next couple of years because of the attention that it's getting when we're talking about legislation. When you do events like this, we're starting to see an increase in those referrals.
Now, I would assume that most of the victims of sex trafficking are female, but what are the numbers look like? Are there males involved too, or what?
There is, and it makes me nervous because our numbers in Connecticut have been very low. So national data suggests about 30% of trafficking victims are male.
No, that's a shocker to me. Maybe 3%, 30%.
30%. And a report out of John Jay out of New York brought that number closer to 50%. So in Connecticut, the last 2 years, we've had 17 boys identified each year. So that is well below the national data. Some of it is really based on society. I listened to a talk show host on one of the nightly shows one time, and he did this horrible skit about men being raped, kind of laughing about it. Boys are much less likely to come forward, both in regards to sexual abuse as well as trafficking, because society tells them it's not okay to come forward. So that is a huge challenge. The 17 kids we identified in 2016 and 17 in 2017 came after we rolled out a curriculum on understanding boys and male-bodied youth. As soon as people started to have that, we started to get the referrals. So we have to learn how to approach these kids. We have to learn about what are their red flags. We have to talk to them, meet with them, engage with them in a way that meets their needs and is kind of where they are at the moment. We do have a wonderful male survivor that's informing our system right now and helping us really kind of dive under this and understand what this looks like. So I think as we start to get this training out in greater numbers, I think we will start to identify more of the males that are victims.
So what makes a child vulnerable to this?
Well, just being an adolescent, for one. So I'll give you an example. We had a girl that had no attachment to child welfare, nothing to juvenile justice. She didn't even have an IEP. Two-parent family, nice part of the state, little brother she got along with, straight A student. First year in high school, she started to have some challenges. Her grades plummeted after she went to her first high school party. Parents concerned, thank goodness they were concerned, they were paying attention, did some snooping and found a list of all the buyers she slept with. Sure. And what we learned is she went to her first high school party, met a group of juniors and seniors. They said, this is what we do. If you want to be part of this group, you need to do it too. So freshman in high school, adolescent, very impulsive, brain not fully developed, don't have all those reasoning skills, really wanted to fit in that freshman year in high school, she joined that group. So it can be kids with no vulnerabilities, but if you add kids that have prior sexual abuse, prior physical abuse and neglect, their risk factors skyrocket. And we have had multiple cases where kids were victims of sexual abuse and neglect and physical abuse as a child, and then groomed by a trafficker and pulled into the life. So those numbers increase dramatically when we start to see kids that have had those adverse experiences.
So like the first example, this is freshmen in high school, and the older kids, I can imagine them saying, let's have sexual relations among ourselves or whatever, but did they recruit her to actually become a prostitute for adults? Is that exactly what happened?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Wow. Now, what was their motivation? I mean, did they make money doing this, or is that what they
make money. So what we have found is that sometimes kids become the go-between with a trafficker. And often the kids that become the go-between, and there's a pretty strong word that we use for that, it's a language in the life, but that go-between is often a victim prior. So even those juniors and seniors probably had some major issues and probably were victims a couple years prior. And then at some point it ended up evolving. We see that a lot in schools. We see that a lot in congregate care settings where there's a kid doing the recruitment for the actual trafficker. And it's really tough because the majority of the time we can identify prior victimization, but now they're the ones coordinating. So when we really try to work through these cases, the feds are wonderful with this population. They're not going to go after the middle person. All right. Hopefully they'll get information from the middle person, but they still want that ultimate person that kind of started this with the kids, and they've been terrific to work with.
So what are the signs someone should look for of someone who might be being victimized in this way?
Sure. There's a number of them, and I always caution people. You may see one sign, and yes, they may be a victim, maybe not. It's usually about a compilation of red flags is what we call them. Some of the biggies are kids that are absent without knowing where they're at. So kids that are gone in the middle of the night, kids that are gone for the weekends, kids that are often running away, kids that when they do run away and when they are gone for the weekend are coming home with things that they don't have the means to buy. Kids that have multiple cell phones. You know, every kid has a cell phone nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
But when they have 2 or 3 cell phones and they're expensive cell phones, I start to question, why do they have them? Traffickers typically, when a kid is in the life, is going to give them a cell phone. When they start to have, if you notice a group of kids or a kid has a tattoo that they didn't have before, and you ask them about it, typically they're going to brag about it because basically they got it without permission from their parent, or it has meaning. You know, this represents my boyfriend who died, this represents my dad who died when I was 2. They'll talk about it. But when kids get really nervous about talking about it, that's when I would say that's a red flag. There's something going on. When they start to look withdrawn, when they start to look like they're losing weight, they're not healthy, when their grades start to drop. Some of those things we typically associate with drug issues could also be trafficking related issues. So there's a whole host of red flags that we should pay attention to and kind of look underneath. We have a list when we're looking at DV cases, substance abuse cases, truancy cases. There are many times that that's how the case looks kind of in front of us, and we later find out that this is a trafficking victim. We had a girl, she was 14, stealing from her aunt constantly. Debit cards, credit cards, stuff that she would go down to the pawn shop and get cash for. Judge was tired of it. We were tired of it. Probation was tired of it. Finally committed her delinquent. All right. Pain in the butt, teenage girl, all the responsibility was on her. After being in treatment for a few months, she disclosed that she was a victim of trafficking. It was gang related, so the gangs are very much into this. She had a quota of $1,000 a night. If she did not meet that quota, she would go to the ATM, pull out the $200, so she would not get beat up by her trafficker. So it's about looking underneath these cases, because sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes that's what's happening.
So if a parent or a teacher in a class, whatever, sees something that, what should they do? How do they approach it? It's a sensitive thing, of course.
Right.
What would you recommend?
We tell people, we use a curriculum called Minimal Facts or Discoverers in Connecticut that really tells people we don't want you interviewing kids. So both with sexual abuse cases as well as trafficking cases, we have seen multiple times kids being interviewed 5, 6, 7 times. And that's traumatic. It's traumatic enough to go through their trauma. Never mind being asked constantly about this. But it is okay to talk to them in general. You know, you're looking tired. You've lost some weight. When's the last time you ate? Where'd you sleep last night? Doesn't look like you got a good night's sleep. Some of those questions will start to get under that there's some red flags. And what we tell folks is if you think this is a possible victim of trafficking, call the care line. You don't have to prove it. Even if we don't have enough information to accept, it goes to our heart team and we pay attention to it. At the very least, we can give the kids some prevention education. And at the very worst, they're going to need long-term survivor care. But we'll make it happen for them. But we can't if we don't know about it.
So now that you're mentioning that, Tammy, why don't you give the specifics, like what phone number, what website people could go to if they see these warning signs and they want to know more.
Right.
Why don't you share with our audience what that is?
Sure. I don't have the hotline number memorized, but I can get it to you in a moment.
Okay.
But I will tell you, if you Google DCF Heart, H-A-R-T, you will get to our Heart webpage. You will see lots of information on trafficking and resources. If you Google DCF Connecticut in general, you'll get our care line number. So it's very easy to find. My contact information's on the website. All of our liaisons in each of our area offices, their emails are on the website. So lots of access. And we have really good partnerships with law enforcement, both with the task force in Connecticut, which includes all our federal partners, as well as local law enforcement. So we will make sure that case is addressed on the legal side. We will ensure this case gets the treatment services they need. We'll make sure that family gets whatever they need. But it's really about ensuring we stop what's happening and we give the youth and the family what they need, the supports.
I would imagine that some kids and even adults might be reluctant to come forward because they might be concerned about criminal prosecution or something. What happens, how does the law treat a kid who's being victimized in this way? Are they part of the crime or a victim of the crime, or how is it treated?
We've seen very mixed approaches. On a really positive note, we've had incredible local police officers do amazing work. I just was working with Vernon PD, Avon PD, New Britain PD, just amazing work. On the downside, we've had really negative experiences, and part of that's because of our laws in Connecticut, which we've tried to address. In Connecticut, so first, on a federal level, it says the exchange of any sex act for anything of value with a child under the age of 18 does not require force, fraud, or coercion. They are a victim of trafficking. Very simple. Connecticut law requires the exchange of a fee. So
Money.
if there's money, if there's a kid out there having sex and she's getting a place to sleep, he's getting a meal, they're getting clothing, whatever it may be, whatever their needs are at that moment, they're not considered victims in Connecticut. And I've had law enforcement very clearly tell us, we are going to arrest her or arrest him on anything we can find because she or he is a willing participant. And that's not trafficking because there's no exchange of a fee.
That's shocking, actually.
It is shocking, which is part of the reason we really need to look at our laws in Connecticut. We're very weak on the demand side. So if we didn't have demand, we wouldn't have traffickers. If we didn't have demand, we wouldn't have victims. Very weak laws in Connecticut on the demand side, and our laws to protect kids and identify them as criminals is probably one of the weakest in the country.
That's shocking. We worked together to try and change Connecticut's laws, and unfortunately, I can share with our audience that the bill that we had put forward, two of them actually, were a couple of bills, died in committee. They never even came up for a vote in either the Senate or the House, and that to me is scandalous. But believe it or not, there's some legislators up here who did not consider that to be a priority. I consider it to be a top priority, and what we're going to need to do is make the public more aware, which is one reason why we're doing this show right now. The public, if it's not aware of this, there won't be the public pressure. But once we get the public aware of it, then there should be a demand put on the legislature to pass a law to address these shortcomings right now. Hundreds of Connecticut children are being victimized in this way, and even one is too many, but hundreds is just shocking.
What these kids have experienced is nothing less than horrendous. When we look at what it does to the victims, all the diseases, the illnesses, the trauma, I mean, it's astounding. And it really boggles my mind and why we are struggling with the idea that adults should not buy kids for sex. And we even had one rep that kind of argued it during the hearing and basically said, well, if she's 17 and 363 days, I think he used, and they buy sex from her, is she considered a victim and is he considered a trafficker? Under the TVPA, absolutely. You don't buy sex from kids. But that's where we are as a society, and we really have to push kind of that mantra is that you can't buy sex from kids. No matter what the scenario, it's not okay.
Well, we come to the end of the interview. I wish we could go on for another hour. There's a lot to talk about, but we're going to put information on how to get in contact with you and the department on this screenshot. And I want to thank you for coming today and sharing this important information. And I want to say to you, my audience, sex trafficking in children is an unacceptable crime. We've got to do something about it, and hopefully next year the legislature will make a change to that. In the meantime, I do want to thank you for tuning in today. This is your State Senator Len Suzio saying thank you, and please contact my office if you want to do something to stop sex trafficking in children in Connecticut. Have a great day.